startup world is not sexy at all. Even once you've got a few customers, right? It's really hard to go from 10 customers to 100 customers.
I know.
And then it's really hard to go from 100 customers to 1,000 customers. Most companies don't survive that kind of growth.
Most of the ones that just fail because of that. People are they chase the romance, the nice story, but the really hard ones they're not necessarily told.
And for every one of those companies, there was probably a lot of luck. And then there probably were a couple of people that were just absolutely killing it, doing 100 hours a week, 120 hours a week or more, just like really grinding really hard to make things happen. If you really want to become big, you have to surf the wave. Otherwise, you're just going to be in the froth of the wave.
Who is Gavin Nicole?
So I am Gavin Nicol, or one of the three, right? So I have been around in the internet world since the very beginning. I have I guess you could say, the honor of having at least two standards that everybody is using every day with my name on them. And one of them, I actually wrote the first version of that everybody knows. So that anybody who programs in the DOM, I wrote the first version of that standard. And I have been in the tech industry for 30 years or a bit more than that, perhaps. I have been through multiple different startups, multiple different exits. I've seen startups succeed, I've seen startups fail, and I do a little bit of angel investing as well. So that's me in a nutshell. I'm a sociologist by training. I'm a technologist by vocation. So most of my interest is actually really around how technology has an impact on society. And I learned a long time ago that pure great technology almost never wins in the market. So I tend to take that also into perspective, right?
My audience, there are some people that they're kind of trying to figure out if they should keep working in their 9 to 5 job or if they should start their own business. And some of them they have already something on the side going on, but they don't know if they should give up the security of the day job and then go full on in their side job. So what would you say about these kind of people?
Well, I think you're missing one group, right? Which is the group of people who could
Okay.
join a startup. So I would say in general, I would strongly encourage everybody to do one small company, one startup at least once in their life, right? And earlier I mentioned to you before, right, there's like three kinds of people. There are employees, people who like to work 9 to 5, who like the standard kind of job and everything like that. And then there are other people who are not comfortable with that. And they always ask themselves, should I be doing something else? Should I be doing something else? Should I be doing something which is a little bit more interesting, or can I do better? And in those groups of people, there's like two different categories, right? There's entrepreneurs who just go out and like shake the trees and try and change the world. And then there's people who join startups. And at least in my experience, like for me, pragmatically, I set up a company in Japan. Like when I was 20 something or other years old, I set up a company in Japan for a company based out of the US. Is that a pure startup? Maybe not. But I set up the office in Japan for a company that was a startup, and took that up to a couple of $1 million in sales. And it's like, I would encourage people to, you got to try it once. And what I've found is a lot of people who leave the corporate environment and go into a small company, they'll never go back to a big company, right? Whether they're a pure
Why
entrepreneur
is
and they're
that?
actually owning the company, or they're, one of the early employees that actually make the company successful, that's a separate question. But, there's a lot of people who should never be working at a big company. I will say that. And, conversely, I would say also there's a lot of people who should never go to university, right? I think that's also true. There's a lot of people go and get a degree in English or something like that. What is that going to do for you, right? It's like you'd be better off spending that money and trying a couple of businesses, trying to set up a couple of businesses and learning about what is the real world about, right?
I'm Brazilian, so even I have some family members that are going through that one. And I keep asking, I was like, why do you have to go to university? I was like, oh, and here you cannot find a job if you don't have a degree.
That's not really true, right? So if you dig into that and you ask yourself, like, what kind of job requires you to have a degree, right? A lot of those are corporate jobs, right? The big company jobs, but you don't need a degree to start a business. So there are a lot of businesses that are started by people who never went to college. Very successful businesses. Actually, I will mention, by the way, one of the interesting demographic things that is going on in the United States is there is what you might call the largest transfer of wealth ever happening in the United States. There's roughly $4 trillion worth of wealth that is going to transfer over the next, say, 10 to 15 years. And that's from all of the people who were farmers, plumbers, people who had boring businesses, laundromats, things like that. A lot of these people are getting to my age and they're going like, I'm kind of tired. I want to retire. I want to pass this on to somebody else. And guess what? That's a very substantial portion of the business in the United States that is going to transfer hands shortly. So that's something you should think about is, those people mostly didn't go to college, right? They didn't go to university. They built a business from the sweat, right? They put sweat equity in, they built the business.
Cody Sanchez, she talks about this kind of businesses, buying boring businesses,
Well,
and
there's a lot of
yeah,
them, but it's
and
also
like
true though. It's an interesting demographic because a lot of those people, going back to the thing about like, should I leave the corporate world and everything like that? It's like there are a lot of people. Actually, a large percentage of the economy is actually operated by people not in big businesses, right? A lot of the day-to-day stuff. Even in technology, there are like some huge companies like Microsoft and Amazon and Google and those guys. But then you go all the way down, and there's a lot of companies which have like 5 employees. And might have 5 employees, but they're pulling in $1 million a year in revenue or a couple of $1 million a year in revenue. It's like, even in technology, it's actually the big companies are less than 20% of the companies, right? And even less than 20% of the revenue overall. So anyway, going back to it, I would say like, I would encourage everybody should try a small company at least once. And I would say you should try to, if you're an entrepreneur or you have an entrepreneurial kind of inclination, you should try to start your own business at least once. And then, for some people, they'll find like, okay, I kind of suck at all the bookkeeping and all that other sort of stuff, or their entrepreneurship really isn't for me. And, then they have to ask themselves, do I want to take a big company job or do I want to do a small company job? Right. Uh, and, again, I would say most entrepreneurs actually have 2 or 3 people behind them that actually make the company successful. You mentioned Cody Sanchez. I bet you she has a couple of people behind her who are actually
yeah,
doing most of the operations, right? And, maybe that's where you fit. Maybe you fit into that category of person. That's where I fit, right? I'm great at making other people successful.
and giving consultancy too. Exactly.
Well, exactly. I help other people, right? So that's actually what I'm good at.
Yep.
But, if I went out and like, I I have started my own business a couple of times and things like that. And it's just like, in the big scheme of things, going out and doing the fundraising and all that other kind of stuff, like that's not the stuff that I'm really good at, right? But if you go like, hey, we need to do that, I can make that happen. So
Yeah, and leveraging not only technology but your business knowledge as well. I think that's one thing that, yeah, exactly. And one thing that you mentioned about joining a startup, I joined a bit late in my late 30s, but I think it was fundamental for me to kind of open up my eyes and figure that I can do way more than I thought was possible. And even when we were talking about having a degree, I studied biology and I worked with
Hmm.
tech, just like you. It's like you studied something and then you end up in tech, right? And I think by working for startups, I realized that you can wear several kind of hats. You can do way more than you believe. You learn how to hustle depending on the startup, because you can take a startup that has already raised a lot of money and then they're already burning money and everyone is still, they're already in the party kind of mode. But if you are hustling to bootstrap a startup, I think that, especially if you're in your 20s, I think that would be fundamental. If I had that experience back then, things would have been different.
I think that's very true, and I think everybody should have that experience at least a couple of times, right? Well, at least once, because then you can figure out what you're actually good at, right? In a startup, in a small company, you have to put on a lot of hats, and sometimes you put on a hat, you go like, "Hey, I was trained as a biologist. I'm awesome at sales. Who
Hmm.
knew?" Right? But you might be very good at it, and until you've done it, you don't know, right? So I think that's a really important lesson for everybody is you got to try. At least you got to try it, right? Maybe you're going to fail, but what's the worst thing that can happen if you fail, right? You leave a big company, comfortable job, you go like, okay, I'm going to try something else. What's the worst that can happen? Oh, doesn't work out. You go back to the big company job, right? You can always find another job.
Yeah, yeah,
It's very hard to find a passion. It's very easy to find a job, right?
yeah.
So that's the advice I'd give to
Uh,
people is you got to go out and find your passion, find out what you're actually really good at, find out what kind of animal you are, and then go for it. I will mention, by the way, I actually think that the VC world has probably done more damage to entrepreneurship than almost anything in my books.
in which way?
Because you have all of these guys who leave from Stanford or something like that. They go, their goal is to go to Y Combinator, raise a couple of $1 million for a stupid idea, and then they think that's life, right? And that is not life. Like, one in 1,000 of those companies survive, right? And the worst part is you just wasted a couple of $1 million of somebody's money. So I think that kind of VC stuff is actually one of the worst thing that has happened. Like in 25 years ago, that wasn't the case. It was actually very hard to raise a couple of $1 million. It was very hard. But now it's too easy. And all these guys like, Y Combinator, Techstars, and whatnot, they have all these programs that are trying to pull people in, but I think it doesn't help, right? It's actually kind of like a fairyland, it's like Disneyland. You're
Yeah,
going in there, having a bunch of fun on somebody else's money, right? But it's not real.
yeah, yeah. I think by working with not startups with companies, and then when I had to deal with the finances and then start cutting costs is different because it's kind of your money, right? It's the boss's money in there. It's not like someone far away that maybe you meet once a month or once a quarter to give
Well,
some
that's it. In
reports.
in
And
startups, in real startups, cash flow is king,
mhm,
right? Ultimately, you have to spend the money that you have, right? So cash flow is king. Actually, it's not so much the money that you have in the bank; it's the cash flow that you have, which determines how much you can spend, right?
yeah,
If you pull in a couple of $1 million, you say, "Hey, I'm going to party until the $202 million is gone," right? If I
and,
raise $2 million,
and I've
it's
seen
like
that
I'm going to party
happening.
until it's gone, and it's like that's not the real world because guess what? Once that money's gone, what do you have left, right? You got to build up revenue, you got to build up sales, and I've seen both kind of both kind of entrepreneurs. The guys who are, for want of a better word, they're kind of always going out and always selling, and they're always raising money, and they're always using other people's money to have a good time. Then I've met other
Hmm.
people, who grind on a day-to-day basis, you know, not paying their hotel bills, not paying their rent, just to keep the team going, who are really grinding it out.
Yeah.
I would say if you haven't ground, you're not really successful because, you know, I've seen a lot of the other guys who have raised a couple of $1 million or $10 million. They go out and they think, okay, hey, I succeeded. They search the rest of their life trying to repeat that success.
Yeah, and that's already tough.
Nine
It's
times
tough
out
to
of
do
10,
it
they don't
once.
succeed.
Yeah,
Nine times
exactly,
out of 10, they
exactly.
don't succeed. Or if they keep raising $2 million from this same, from this guy, this VC, or from that VC, after 10 years, people go like, hey, how many companies have you started and how many actually succeeded? Right? At some point, you have to pay that piper, right? Somebody's going to ask you, so what did you actually do, right? Other than waste money.
Yeah, that's the part that most of the people that I know that they want to leave and they keep saying, "Ah, I should start, I should get my own startup, like I have brilliant ideas." And this is what I say is like, it's a bit harder than you think. And even like if you raise the money, it's just like they think, oh, that's I have all the money, and figuring out how to kind of allocate the money so you have like 1, 2, 3 years of running the business and then trying to get clients. It's tough. It's tough. I think it's
Yeah,
easier
it's
for
very
you to
tough.
kind of still have your job and pay for your side hustle. I think you get more discipline with money if you go down the route than just like, yeah, I'm gonna find someone to finance these and figure it out.
That's true. And also, it's kind of like if you go down the path of like, okay, hey, I'm going to start a business, like everybody has ideas, right? Ideas are a dime a dozen. That's one of the things that I've learned over the years, right? It's like everybody has great ideas. And one of my problems, by the way, is I have too many great ideas. So, it's kind of like, okay, trying to decide, okay, what is the cool thing to do? Most of the things I think about are too complex, right? And, the really good ideas are actually very simple things that you can execute against very quickly and very agilely. That's my problem, is I tend to look at it, things I think about are too complex and too hard to operate against, right? The really good ideas are simple ideas that you can execute against, get some revenue, build a business around, right? Those are the really good ideas. And I think that's the discipline that a lot of people lack, is being able to sit down and have an idea and then say, this is too hard to work on. And then B, say like, okay, even if this idea is a pretty simple idea, it seems like it's worthwhile working on, setting up the plan and the execution to actually make it happen, right? I'm very good at making difficult ideas and very complex things happen very quickly,
Mhm.
right? That's what I'm very good at. That's not quite the same as saying, okay, I can set up an execution path for the whole business. That's a little bit of a different thing as well, right? It goes into cash flow planning, sales, all that other sort of stuff. And I'm a little bit worse at that for myself, only because I tend to think too complex. So yeah.
Mhm.
But yeah, and I
Yeah,
think
from
a lot of people just don't realize the grind that it takes and the discipline that it takes. The fact that you have to sit down and go like, if I have a business, I'm paying employees, I'm paying taxes, I'm bringing in revenue. If I don't bring in revenue, I have to fire somebody,
yes,
right? The
that's
first
an
time you have to fire,
experience in
the
itself.
first time you have to fire somebody is kind of a bit of an experience, right? It's like, oh,
Yeah.
wow, that's what that feels like. It's worse if you go like, oh, I
Mhm.
have to fire somebody because guess what? My insurance rates went up. That's a reality of kind of business, right? There's all these things that you can't control that come in. You still have to deal with them. And ultimately, you're responsible for your customers and you're responsible for your employees, right? So the business
Yeah.
isn't yours; it's your customers or your employees' business, right? It's not your business, and your job is to manage that. That's a very difficult lesson to learn, I think, for most people.
Yes, especially for those who were employees for a long, long time, and then suddenly, if they find themselves in that situation, because I don't know, this is my perspective. When we are employees, we kind of like have this mentality that people control our lives. It's just like, oh, my boss doesn't give me the salary I want. Oh, I need more holidays. Oh, they're asking me to work too much. And then you demand, demand, demand. But then when you become an owner, you kind of experience that from the other side. And
Hmm.
then you have to worry about like each one of my employees, they have their own story, they have their own families, they have their own bills to pay. If I delay the salary by sometimes by half a day, it may make someone's life really miserable. And you have to think like, and worst is when you don't have the money to continue paying for that or those employees, and then you have to choose who goes first. Then you have to jump into that call or meet them in person and say like, we have to let you go. It's not easy. It's really not
It is
easy.
absolutely not easy. And, one of the reasons why I say to people that they should try joining a small startup or a small company at least once is because even if you're a big company employee and that's kind of what you're comfortable with, at least you'll understand the troubles that your manager is going through, your boss is going through, and those guys. Because guess what? Even, like you look at some of the mass layoffs, right? So, say, for example, at Google or whatnot, they lay off like thousands of people.
Hmm.
Somebody still in that company is making the decision that they have to fire somebody, right? So the calculus still exists. And,
Yeah.
maybe you don't get along so well with your manager in that big company, but guess what? When he has to fire somebody, he's going to have a crappy day, right? One way or
Yeah.
another. So until you've kind of like been on the other side of it, you don't appreciate how hard it is to be on the other side. So it is worth doing. But
Yeah.
I think also, the other
Yeah.
thing which goes about, starting your own company is what you just mentioned, by the way. A lot of people think like, oh, my boss controls my life, the company controls my life. You should ask yourself, I think, you know, do you really want to give that amount of control to other people?
Yeah. That's a good question. And most of the people they don't even think about it.
That's true. But you should ask yourself that question. If you're not comfortable with the answer, and if you come back and people you say like, sure, I don't care, it's just a job. Well, so there's two problems with that, right? One is that you yourself are not doing as well as you probably should be doing because you're not developing yourself as well as you should. And then the second thing is you're looking at the company as just a job. And it's like, do
Yeah.
you really want to do just a job for 40 years? Some people are happy doing that, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I would say that most people really do want to do a little bit better than having just a job for 40 years. Right? Even in a big company, right? I've met a lot of like,
Yeah.
software engineers and stuff. And it's like, one of the things I always say to people is engineers at the end of the day, what do they want to do more than anything else? They want to help people. They want to come
Yeah.
up with clever solutions to difficult problems to help people, right? That's what engineers want to do. So even
Hmm.
inside of a big company, most of those people are not happy just having a job.
Yeah.
If
And
you
I
if
think
you
that
give them the opportunity to do a little bit more, then they do a lot more, right?
yeah. Yeah. And if you think about it, like a lot of those people that they like to have the 9 to 5 job, usually they kind of like this kind of like comfort. They are not like too risk. They're super risk averse, and sometimes the team is kind of a bit kind of like not pushy in terms of like going extra steps, extra miles, and then you kind of get comfortable in there. Because if you have like a team that everyone's pushing each other, you're gonna feel uncomfortable in that team.
Well, I think it's actually in two different categories, even on that side of the fence, right? So there's actually two broad categories of people who are happy in a 9 to 5. There's one group of people which are risk averse, right? So they want the 9 to 5, and then they focus. They actually spend a lot of time and energy making sure that they are succeeding at the 9 to 5 because they want to be comfortable and they want to have that, you know, that stability. There's another group of people who are in the 9 to 5 who really just don't care whether it's this company or the next company or whatever. They really don't. They actually don't really care about what they are doing. They may be good at, say, software development, for example, right? There's a lot of guys who are coders. They wake up in the morning, they go like, hey, in Jira, I have these things to solve. I'm going to take on this ticket and I just do my work and I do my check-in, do a PR. That's their day. If they do it for one company or another company, they don't care. Because at the end of the day, their passion is not that. It's somewhere else, right? So they probably have something else they're doing on the side, whether it's, doing organic gardening or whether it's doing some side project or something like that. They probably have something else that they really care about, and they look at the job as just a way to get money. So it's kind of like two
Yeah,
different categories. Yeah,
yeah.
I would say that second
For
category is
me,
very sad. That second category is kind of sad, right?
yeah, yeah. But I'm sure you crossed some of these people during your
Oh yeah.
cross with some of these people during your experience, right?
Well, I don't
So
know.
did
I'd
I.
ask you, like you've probably 50% of the people you've met are probably in that category, right?
Well, I worked in the I worked for the university in Brazil, which is, you know, government jobs. And I would say that if you wanna have like a high probability of finding this kind of people, you go to these kind of jobs, right? And then for me, it was I worked for some years in there. I'm like I cannot stay here for too long because of that. It's like even when I was doing that, I was like trying to do way more than my role was because I couldn't stand. But there were some people that were there for like decades just doing the same job, and they were like 9 to 5, get out, 9 to 5, get out, and that was it. And if you ask for just this tiny bit more than they were supposed to do, it was a no. So
I actually think that
it's sad, as you said.
most people honestly, really are not happy in that kind of world. Again, the people that are risk
I know.
averse are happy. The people who are risk averse are happy in that world because they can kind of reduce the risk profile and they're kind of comfortable with that. But most people who are not risk averse, like strongly risk averse, who are just in a 9 to 5 daily grind, they're probably not really happy, right? And it's not only in technology too, right? It's like, you have guys who are doing like, for example, like carpentry work, right? And you have a bunch of guys who are just going in and kind of like knocking together houses or something like that. They're probably not really happy knocking together houses. That's probably the best work that they can do, but they're not really happy about it, right? So, if they were a little bit more aggressive, they'd say like, okay, I'm going to become the best guy that I can at framing, right? Then they care a little bit about it. Then they might become an expert, and eventually, if they become really good at that, then they'll start their own business, right? But unfortunately, a lot of people never take the leap to try and make themselves better, or to think like, hey, if I did this, I could go a little bit further, or never really focus on development. Because there's a lot of entrepreneurship, as you know, right? A lot of entrepreneurship also is really about self-development and learning
Yeah,
stuff. Like you have to do things that you've never done before, right? or you become the very best at what you can, very best at what you are kind of like intrinsically good at, and just being able to chase that, right? That's the core of entrepreneurship to me, really, right?
Yeah. And the thing that you mentioned about people is staying unhappy in these kind of jobs, I think it's it's a lot of mental kind of blockage, right? Like self-limiting beliefs that you're like, I cannot get another job. If I wanted to, it's like I couldn't. And this is what like the past weeks I had some calls with some people looking for a job. And they were like, yeah, it's really hard right now. And they kind of call you expecting you to just give them a job because they're kind of like begging.
As you
And I'm like,
understand, I
oh,
have
it's
that
like, no.
problem all the time. Yes.
Yeah. You want to shut down your LinkedIn because of that, right?
Yeah, exactly. I did.
No. Sometimes I do. They don't even realize that they are doing that. They just, it's the kind of the victim's mentality.
Yeah, the important point, actually, which you just said, and this is actually a very difficult lesson for most people to learn, but the important thing that you just said is people are limiting themselves, right? Because they don't understand what they're actually capable of. So another way that I like to talk to people about this sort of stuff is say like, hey, listen, what you should do is accept the very worst possible outcome, and then think of what you're going to do in the very worst possible situation, right? So, for example, like if I lost all of my job tomorrow, I lost all of my income tomorrow, I have a way forward on that, right? I could say, oh, okay, if that happened, I can move forward. You know, if I lost my job at this big company, what would I do after that, right? If you become comfortable with that, guess what? All the fear goes away, right? And then you don't limit yourself anymore because it's kind of like, oh, what's the worst thing that can happen? Well, that could happen. Okay, well, if that happens, I can do this, right?
Yeah.
So that's actually always a good thing to ask yourself. Is like, what would I do in the absolute worst case? Now, I can tell you for myself, I've always felt comfortable that I can get another job.
Yeah.
Because in the worst case, like if I had to, I would clean shoes, right? I would polish shoes to make money if I had to, right? I don't care,
You see,
right? I would do anything if I have to, right? It's just like
mm-hmm.
what, you can always do something.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I need to have this
Yeah.
job. Why do you need to have that job, right? When I hear about people who've been out of work for a year, I'm kind of like, what's your problem? Right? It's like
Yeah.
there's plenty of things you can do, right? You can start an online business for Christ's sake, right? Just give it a try, right? Or oh, hey, I want to get a job in sales. Oh, maybe you're not getting a job in sales. Maybe you should go and do a cert and then go and join, do project management. There's,
Mm-hmm.
there's always a path forward, you know. And what you just said is 100% correct. As people put on the blinders and they say like, if I don't do this, I can't succeed. And it's like, there's plenty of paths forward. The question is,
Yeah.
is it going to be painful? Is it going to be fun? Maybe not. I don't know. But
Yeah. But it's interesting that you mentioned about the getting ready for the worst. I do have an exercise that I run with some people during coaching sessions, which is called the fear setting. And when I go through is that what they are trying to achieve, and I ask them to write down what would be the worst thing that could happen if they try that, and try to amend that. What what would they do to avoid that outcome? And then what would they do if that outcome happened? Right? If the worst came to worst and it happened, like how do you recover from that? And one
Well, I
thing that
think
you
that last
mentioned
one
as
is the
well.
most important one, right? Because it's kind of like, hey, yeah, in some cases you can't avoid the worst case scenario because, it's like, hey, you go out and you raise a whole bunch of money from guys who are scammers, right? Which happens. They
Hmm.
go to jail and you end up with nothing. It's like, okay, well, that can happen, right? It's like,
Yeah.
you have to become comfortable with the idea that, hey, listen, that, even when you raise money, you may not get the money that you raised, right? It's like, you just got to become
Hmm.
comfortable with it.
Yeah.
It's like
And
once you're
and the
once you're
other thing
comfortable
that you
with the worst
mentioned,
possible outcome, it's like, hey, what else? What's the worst that can happen?
yeah, yeah, and one thing that you mentioned, so I was like, I would polish some shoes. I think exactly the same. When I went to London, I had just finished my master's with my wife, and I was looking for a job. I got a position to do another master's, and then it was like so expensive that I'm like, you know what? Let me find a job. But I didn't have the experience because I was trying to get to become a web developer, and then it was taking too long. And you know what? I went to a shopping center and I applied to fold t-shirts. That was the job. I would go there when the shop closed and I would fold. And the worst that happened was that they didn't select me. So
Well,
it's
that can
just
still
like
happen too. But there's
exactly.
always
And then
plenty.
I'm like,
There's always
okay,
plenty of work, right?
exactly. But for me it was okay. I'm like, okay, well, what's the next thing? And then I was going to reapply to that job. And then I said, look, I can work in a pub as well. I'm gonna be a waiter. I'm good with that too. It's like I don't mind. But then as I was going to apply to that, I kept applying for dev jobs, and then I got a dev
Of
job.
course.
But the thing is that for me, it was like I just need to pay some bills,
I was just going to
and
say
most of the
that
people
it's
they
like,
don't
hey,
want.
listen, if you have a choice between paying rent, right, and not paying rent, and getting the job that you want, or just getting a job, what are you going to do? It's like, I'm going to get a job to pay rent, right? And it's like, I don't care what the job is. In the worst case, I will get a job. If I have to flip burgers, polish shoes, I don't care, right? That has always been kind of like a fundamental like principle for me. It's like at the end of the day, I don't care. I will meet my obligations and I will earn money, right? There's plenty of ways to do that. So the question isn't how, the question isn't whether you can earn money. The question is how can you earn money, right? And some of it may be like, hey, listen, you're putting in fences, right? I used to put in fences when I was a young fellow, and 12 hours a day digging holes, putting in fence posts, stringing wire, right? It was actually really good for me physically, but it was not exactly easy work, right?
Hmm.
But I made a lot of money doing that, right? And there's always something you can do. So when you sit down and you go like, hey, what's the worst that could happen? My business fails. I lose my job. It's like, I can always do something else. Once you're comfortable with that, like a lot of you talk about risk aversion, right? It's like, I'm actually a pretty risk averse person, but once you're comfortable with failure, it's okay, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And there's one thing that goes into this line that I think it helped me when I became a developer. Because sometimes being a developer means like you're gonna nowadays it's a bit easier because you can use AI to help you. But when you hit a wall, you need to keep pushing through and you learn how to grind. So you like middle of the night, the bug is in there, you have to fix it, and then there's no one else in the office to help you out because everyone else kind of left and you're in there and you need to grind. And I was having a chat with someone that was looking for a job this week. And then when I told this person that I was working on my own business for average 12 to 16 hours a day, and that person was looking for a job full time, that person wasn't kind of looking for a job for more than 8 hours a day. I'm like, it's your job to find a job. You should be kind of working harder, I think, because nobody's just gonna, hey, you need a job, there you go. So people are not used to grind.
Well, also they're looking for a job, right? So they're just looking for a job. And this is what I was saying before. It's like there are unfortunately a lot of people who will just look for a job and they'll be satisfied with just having a job. And actually, in tech, it's kind of worse because tech in general pays kind of a bit too much if you want to think about it one way. Because like, hey, if I land just a job, I'm pretty comfortable, right? If I'm polishing shoes or flipping burgers, my life is pretty miserable. And me personally, I would have a lot of you know angst about that, and I'd be going like, okay, I got to find a better job, and I'd keep chasing something. But in tech, it's actually pretty easy to earn enough money to just go like, well, I'm pretty comfortable. I'm pretty happy. 8 hours a day is pretty comfortable. And I think actually that's an important point, though, right? And is that you should never. I think especially for the people who are listening to this podcast, the people in your kind of like circles, right? They're never really satisfied with themselves. That's actually kind of like a big difference between like what you might call people who are good for entrepreneurship or startup world and people who aren't. Is you're always asking a question: could I do better? Could I do something else? Could I do something? You know, I'll say when I was again, I'm a sociologist, right? I went to Japan. I knew nothing about computers. At some points, in Japan, I would stay awake for days almost, right? Where to the point that I learned how to use the speaker on a PC 9801 computer to play like, Bach or something like that. And I spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours just doing that stupid thing, right? But it taught me a lot about machines. It taught me a lot about programming, right? And it's just like, and that's the same thing. It's like I always have probably somewhere around about 2 foot, like 24 inches of paper beside my bed that I'm reading, right? Like that never changes because there's always stuff to learn, right? Always stuff you should chase, and I think that's just part of the entrepreneurial spirit is always learning, right? You have to become the best that you can be, and if you're not willing to become the best that you can be, you can have a sad life. That's the reality, right?
Yeah. And to that point, I think if you're always willing to learn more and more, you stop having fear of facing a problem that you don't know how to tackle because you're like, oh, I'm gonna figure it out.
Well, if I
Because
don't
that's
figure it out, one
in
of
the
the things I've
beginning
learned
of, yeah.
also, one of the other things I've learned over the years, there are a lot of people who are a lot smarter than me, right? So that's
Yeah.
like if I can't figure it out, somebody else has already figured it out, right? It's like
Yeah.
like there are people like Leslie Lamport, who's just like he's a god in the computer science world, right? And it's like there's no way in hell that I could ever compare myself to him. He's a god, right? But you can learn from him. And
Mhm.
that's the other thing. It's like, hey, if I can't figure it out myself, there are other people who have figured it out. So I just need to go and figure out who those people are, go and talk to them or learn from them one way or another. There's courses online, there's papers online, there's some mechanism to go down that path. So
And even reaching out to people. Nowadays, people don't leverage LinkedIn enough because they're afraid of rejection. Just ask a question. Worst case scenario, the person won't reply. And it happened to me so many times that after the third or fourth time, you're kind of like, I don't care anymore. So you keep trying,
yeah,
but people don't even try once.
I'm pretty terrible at networking in general, to be honest. Like, so yes, I agree with you. It's like you should just go out and try, but I'm pretty terrible at it. Uh, Partly because a lot of people reach out to me rather than going the other way. But
Yeah.
I will say, one of the things that I've learned over the years also is like there's no shame in going and saying to people like, I don't know, can you give me your thoughts, right? Can you tell me? most people are very happy to go and talk to you and so say like, hey, listen, this is what I think, or this is what I've learned, right? Well, a lot of people, most people are willing to talk about their experience and to teach people. But I'm not as good as that as I should be, to be honest. But it is something which you should do, right? Because you shouldn't hesitate to reach out to people.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe you didn't have to. You didn't have the opportunity or the need to do so. Which, in my case, even like when I asked for your help several times. It's like I know that Gavin could help me out with it.
Well, that's what you say, right? Don't burn bridges unless you, especially with people that you know who can help you. But the other thing which I have seen, like you see there's endless cases, right, of guys who just are like, hey, I sent the CEO an email every week for 2 years, and then finally I got the job, right? It's like,
Yeah.
you should, another way to think about it. One of the things I learned in sales also, right, because I used to do sales a long time ago, and that's an experience. But like everybody should do sales at least once, right? That's what I think. But
I think so.
yeah, one of the things I learned in sales was every no is one step closer to a yes. Right? That's the thing you say. It's like, hey, all you do is you ask people and they say no. Ask again. They say no. Ask again. They say no. If you do it 100 times, somebody will say yes, right? And then you say like, okay, well, why did they say yes versus these other guys who said no? Maybe there's a learning in that, and you can kind of refine it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Again, it goes into fear of failure, fear of rejection, right? It's like once you get back to the comfort with, hey, what's the worst case scenario? It's like they say no. It's like, who cares?
Yeah, I can't remember who had this. They had a boot camp that the first task for everyone was to go and ask $5 from a stranger in the street. So you just go, anyone. They're like, you have $5. The person, no. Okay, thank you. And then you had to do that several times until you kind of got comfortable with the rejection. I really like that. And I've
I was
done
going to say, it sounds like
these
a
weird
good
things.
cause, right?
Yes, exactly. But well, you
I
don't
was
have to
going to
pay for the course. You just do that.
I was going to compare that. I did a Dale Carnegie course many, many, many years ago, right? Which is kind of like, they win friends and influence kind of people kind of thing, And that one there was, they had a lot more, what you might consider kind of like cultish kind of things that they did during that course, right? The one you just talked about sounds a lot more pragmatic. The Dale Carnegie one was more like, self-imaging kind of stuff rather than just going out and like dealing with people. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when you said about sales, like I'm working with a team right now, and we do sales training every day for an hour. And what I say to them, which is something that I've learned, is that there's no sale to be made in a conversation like that. If you come like, I need to close, that gonna get in the middle of the way. What you need to do is just have a conversation, because there are three outcomes in there. The person will close with you, the person will not close with you, they will close with someone else, or that person will do nothing. So, but because people are afraid of selling, they don't realize that in any kind of job that you do, there are moments of sale. If you work with a team and you have an idea, you have to sell your idea to your team. And that's a conversation. There's no sale to be made. It's a conversation, right? If you have a family and you have a discussion, you have to also convince people to do something, to go into, I don't know, like watch this kind of movie, go into that kind of holiday. It's a sale to be made as well. And in the end of the day, it's a conversation. And people were like so afraid of that. So I agree with you. It's like everyone should have like a good experience with a startup, one or two, grind it. And one thing that I've heard in the past, and I really like that, is that everyone should have at least one experience, a work experience serving others.
So serving
right?
others is a bit different from sales because I think
I
actually,
know.
back in the early days of the technology industry, we used to have this thing called the engineer of the week, right? And what we'd take is one of the core engineers, the software developers, and put them on support for a week.
Oh, I
So
like.
they had to talk
Yeah.
to the customers, right? And it's like, okay, you have to hear the customer's voice and you have to understand their pain, which is actually a really great experience for engineers, right? It's actually difficult for them, but it's
Hmm.
good for them to understand. That's a bit different from sales, though, right? Because I think also for sales, there's there's kind of an art to it, and it depends on the kind of software that you're selling or the kinds of services that you're selling. So I used to do what I would call an evangelical sale, right? So I used to go out and I'd actually give a lot of presentations and conferences, and I'd talk to people about all the wonderful things that the technology could do without actually selling our product.
Hmm.
But then once people understood the value, they would come back and say, like, hey, I heard this presentation about the potential value of doing this. Then it became a sale, right? It's like, okay, now
Yeah.
I'm going to sell you on our software. And
Hmm.
the distinction between those two things is there are a lot of people who go out and they say that they're doing sales and they just do pie in the sky. At the end of the day, what you're saying, which is about the conversation, is you have to make it real for the other person. You have to provide
Yeah.
real value to the other person, right? At the end of the day.
Hmm.
And if it has to be concrete, because if it's not concrete, you can close the deal or stuff, but you close the deal once. You won't have a customer for life, right? But if you're actually
Yeah.
providing continuous value to them by understanding their problem, right? Again, that's the conversation, understanding, right? Empathetic, understanding what the other person is about. Then
Yeah.
you'll have a real sale, and that will be a sale that will last for a long time. But a lot of people just do the purely evangelical thing, and then that's all they can do. And that's a poor way to do sales, I would say.
Yeah.
I was pretty good with the follow
Yeah.
up.
But
Like it's like, hey, I'll do the
yeah.
evangelical thing, and then people who are interested would come back. Nowadays you do the marketing thing. You do a couple of webinars and things like that. It was a simple thing.
Hmm.
You do webinars. People who are interested, they'll come back to you, and then you talk to them. Right?
Yeah. I was going to say that the evangelical part nowadays, it's a webinar on LinkedIn, for example.
Yeah,
If you do a
exactly. It's a
webinar in there,
LinkedIn
you
thing
explain
or a
about the
Medium
problem.
post or
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So, but I think the important part of the sales training that I stress is about knowing how to make good questions, because sometimes a prospect comes to you with an idea of their pain points and they already have a solution, just like when they go to a doctor and they say, doctor, I have cancer and my medicine is that, right? And the doctor's like, oh, wait a minute. And this is what I tell them. I was like, you should treat this as a sales call like that. It's just like sometimes they have no clue what they want or they don't even understand the problem, right? And I'm even like, I'm not gonna go down the route, but I don't like when they ask uh, request for proposals, right? RFPs, because of that. It's just a client that they think they know the problem and they kind of have somewhat a solution. They ask you for that. I'm like, I'd rather have a conversation before doing that. But
Yeah,
anyways,
it depends though, on that one there. I would say like my experiences again, it depends on what kind of product you're selling, right? So an RFP you just mentioned, that's usually, not that's an analytic frame, right? So people are thinking in an analytic way and they're saying like I need to compare five products and I'm going to choose the best one. And in the case of pure technology, you actually may be able to do that, right? You just go and say like, okay, I need a database that does X, Y, and Z and can scale to 1 trillion rows, and you put together the matrix, you send out an RFP. So on pure technology sales, that's probably okay. And in that case, when you're doing the marketing, you lead with the stats, right? You lead with all of the numbers and you lead with all of those things. If you're doing solution sales, like for example, in your case, you're selling like website kind of stuff, right? And you're saying like, okay, well, I need to make something which looks good. I need to have it, meet these people's requirements. That's a lot more discovery, right? That's not an analytical sale. That's actually something which is really going in and figuring out what the pain point is, what their real requirements are, what they're trying to accomplish. That's a hell of a lot harder, right? That's actually a harder sale in a lot of ways because it's very subjective, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be very empathetic for that kind of sale, right? But it's a spectrum, right? It's like, hey, if I'm going to buy an engine, it's like I need an engine which has 2,000 horsepower, runs on diesel, and has this fuel consumption. It's pretty easy to buy that engine, right? But if you're saying like, well, I need to be able to like do a mine, for example. I need to get the right equipment for doing a mine. That's a different question. It's like, okay, well, what kind of equipment are you looking for? There's a whole bunch of questions in that.
Mhm. Yeah, that's very true. I wanted to pick your brains a bit because we're talking about startups and these kind of preparing for the worst. And I wanted to pick your brains because I know that you do some investments as well, right? Angel investing. For those who are out there, they already have some sort of idea, they're putting something together. Like, what would you say that they should focus when they start looking for an angel investor?
Yeah. So the main thing is, at least I think, you've got to have one or two things. You've either got to have just an absolutely brilliant idea that nobody else has and the ability to execute on it, or you have to have a business plan, right? Because it's like you can have an absolutely brilliant idea that has never been done before, so nobody can put together a business plan around it because you just kind of like, okay, there are just too many unknowns on that. But what you can do is say like, I'm going to develop this really awesome technology. There's like 10 different industries that I think I'm going to go and chase. I have a team that can build the tech, and we're just going to go throw shit at the wall and see what sticks, right? So you can go down that path. And that's actually, a lot of the Y Combinator guys would like to think that's what they're doing. But what I've seen, at least in most of those things, is the ideas are very unoriginal, right? And it's like, oh, good grief. I've probably had that idea 20 years ago, or I've seen like 10 different variations of that same idea. If you come to me and say, like, I'm going to use Chat GPT to make the insurance industry a whole lot more I'm like, I have no interest in talking to you because you have no idea what you're talking about, right? It's like you have to like absolutely blow somebody's socks off with your brilliance. Otherwise, you shouldn't even think about it. Or you have to have a business plan. It's like, okay, hey, this is a space which I understand well. I need to have this money to do X, Y, and Z. Here's sources of money. Here's uses of money. You have to have a relatively baked business plan because otherwise you're just wasting people's money, right? You got to have either
And
one of those too, right?
yeah, even if it's a brilliant idea, I would try to put at least a partial business plan in
Yeah, I
place.
mean, obviously, I just put those out as two ends of the spectrum. Obviously, there's a continuum on there. The best one would be
Yeah,
I've got a brilliant idea and I know exactly how I'm going to tackle a particular industry and make a whole bunch of money. Now, that would be the best of all ideas.
yeah.
You shouldn't be talking to me about that. You should be talking to somebody with a lot more money than me.
Hmm.
But yeah, those ideas exist. But also, if you have an idea like that, you may not be best for you to be talking to a VC.
Who would you talk to?
right? There's something else people don't think about is other ways to raise money, right? Angel investment of VC is one. There are small business loans. There are all kinds of other avenues that you can take to raise money. And if you have a really awesome idea and a really awesome execution plan, VC may not be the path for you,
Yeah. This is good. This is good conversation
right?
because what are the downside of going through VC company, right? Getting these money.
Versus doing like small business loans and
Yeah,
things like that.
crowdfunding. I don't know if you raise money.
Well, I think so. I would say three broad things that I see problems with VC, right? So one would be that uh, the VCs have unrealistic expectations, right? Quite often, so they expect a 10x return or something like that. So they'll push companies down a particular path, right? Which they probably shouldn't be following from a business perspective, right? So that's one thing. And there's dilution and all that other sort of stuff with it. The second set of problems with raising VC is that it defocuses you from revenue, right? Now, if you have a business plan and you actually have the ability to execute on an idea and start pulling in revenue, kind of go like, well, why shouldn't I take out a bank loan versus pulling in a VC, right? There may be good reasons for pulling in a VC if they're very smart people and they can give you really good advice and they can help you with networking and things like that. But the money is probably the least part of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's another question. It's like, okay, well, if I already have a really good plan and I know exactly what I'm going to do, maybe I should just go and raise money at the bank, right? Or from family and friends. Maybe I should just mortgage my house, right? If I have a house. Right? The third problem with VCs is that, you know, if you take on money from a VC, guess what? You have an obligation to that VC. It restricts your freedom a lot, or it should restrict your freedom a lot. Some people take on VC and then they do whatever the hell they want. That usually ends badly, but but that's the third thing, right? So I think you got to think very carefully about that. Like, I'll say for me, I tend to focus on people who are willing to put in the grind. People who are trying hard, like in a space where you can see that, okay, maybe it's going to take a year or two for the business to succeed or something like that, but you can feel at the gut level that there is actually a business in there. That's like, those are the things that I like to look at personally. But uh, some of those things also they don't work out.
And I think this third part is the one that most of the people they overlook, right? They think about the money that they can raise, but they don't think about the consequences of that in terms of their freedom, in terms of the
And
decisions
the obligations.
exactly, right?
Yeah,
They probably think about the parties as well.
yeah. Yep. Yeah, I have people that yeah, I shouldn't talk too much about it, but I have seen some cases where it's like, you know, put in a little bit of money in something, but you never hear back.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, if you're a CEO, the last thing you want to do is piss off people who have put money into your company and who will talk to other people who could put money into your company.
Very
Right?
true.
It's like, if a VC or somebody puts money into your company, you owe them at least once a month an update, right?
Yeah, yeah, of course. And
And you should ask them, right? It's like, hey, what do you think about X, Y, and Z, right? Like, that's just common knowledge, common respect.
yeah. All right. And I wanted to take probably the last part of our conversation for today. It would be more about these new startups and tech, as you said, like I'm gonna use ChatGPT. I think a lot of ideas are coming out of ChatGPT or any of these AIs. and becoming startup ideas. What can you tell me about that?
So I would say two things along that which you should focus on. One is the macro trends, right?
Hmm.
And then the other one is really kind of like the day-to-day execution kind of stuff, or the niche ideas. So if you look broadly speaking with artificial intelligence, right? I'm old enough. This is the second time we've had an artificial intelligence boom in my lifetime, right? So one of the things I will say is if there's a new technology that appears, everybody will start throwing money at this idea. And this is actually one of the bad things about
Hmm.
VCs and nowadays is they all just follow they all just follow one another. They just keep dumping in, right? They do very little diligence on the companies. And unless you have a truly original idea and a truly original application idea, what you end up in is a race to the bottom, right? So a good example is, again, like I just mentioned insurance before because it's been around for a while, right? Hey, take a picture of your accident, send it in, AI will analyze it, and you get a payout in 15 minutes,
Hmm.
right? It's like, guess what? That's been done 10 years ago. You think artificial intelligence is going to make that a whole lot better? If there's 100 companies in that space, how many of those companies are going to survive, right? At the end of the day, I would say come up with something a little bit more original than just applying AI. Oh, hey, I'm going to apply Chat GPT to legal documents. I'm going to apply Chat GPT to blah. It's like any idiot can think of that kind of stuff. So I would say you got to look at the macro trends, which is artificial intelligence is moving forward. Don't try and find a point solution along a macro trend. Like artificial intelligence is like there's a whole wave developing on that. Don't look for the individual kind of like particular things. You got to be surfing that wave. If you really want to become big, you have to surf the wave. Otherwise, you're just going to be in the noise, right? You're just going to be in the froth of the wave. So that's one thing. And in almost direct opposition to that, I would say the other way to actually do something really significant is you find a niche and you go very deep into that niche, right? So, for example, one of the companies I work with is very deep in supply chain analytics around particularly things like labor abuse and things like that, which is actually a very difficult space to get into, right? And you can apply some artificial intelligence techniques and things like that, but it's a very narrow niche and it's very deep, right? And that's one of those things where it's like, it's going to take you 18 months or 20 months or maybe even 3 years to establish a beachhead in there. And there'll be other companies that come in that have like no real depth in the space. And they'll get bought up, they'll get moved on and whatnot. But if you keep focusing on it and build real value, well, guess what? You're going to come out the other side with a successful company. You're going to come out with a sustainable company on the other side of that. So there's two ways. You've either got to ride the big wave or you go very deep on this on a small direction. Otherwise, you're kind of wasting time.
Yeah, but I think most of the people that are trying to get the big wave and doing the poor job, which is like, I have an idea. What is the idea? I will get
No, there's only
ChatGPT,
a few people who are
and
going to
that's
surf that wave, and those are the people that made the wave, right? So it's like Apple made the wave, right? Tesla made the wave, right? Like OpenAI made that wave. Actually, OpenAI and Google and a few other guys, they made that wave, right? Everybody else is just noise, right? They're just like they're bubbles. They're just bubbles in the wave. So, there'll be companies, a lot of companies, which will probably raise 2 million, 5 million, $10 million to do. Hey, we're going to apply Chat GPT to X, Chat GPT to Y. There'll be a lot of money raised. There'll be a lot of money lost. There'll be 1,000 companies started. 10 will survive.
and even to make their first sale, right? For those who are already working with AI for the past 2 or 3 years, you can spot what's ChatGPT wrapped in kind of like niceties. But you get like, come on, man, this is a ChatGPT bot. They're just trained a bit.
Well, that's it. And even in the insurance space, right? It's like it's very easy to say like, "Hey, I'm going to use Chat GPT for insurance," right? I'm picking on insurance. I probably shouldn't, but it's a pretty easy one to pick on. Uh, but it's like, "Hey, I'm going to use Chat GPT for insurance," and it's like, well, okay, that's great. How do you make your first sale, right? Go out and raise $2 million. Who will be your first customer? Will it be Aon? Aon probably has already got something like this, right? Geico might already have something like this, right? It's like, well, that's it. So you've still got to answer the questions. Like, hey, I'm going to go out and raise money to do blah for blah, right? ChatGPT. It's like, okay, so that's great. How are you going to make money? It's a great question,
Usually
right?
they're like,
Most
no,
insurance companies not.
I'm gonna get a big client. It's like, okay, which one?
Yeah, and I mean, crypto is another thing, right? So crypto, I've been involved in. Actually, I'm kind of like something of an expert on all complementary currencies and cryptocurrency and things like that. But most of them are the same thing, right? It's just like, oh, we're going to raise a coin to do blah. And it's like, wow, how many of those have I seen? Right?
Hmm.
You read the white paper and it's kind of like, this is obviously a scam, right? It's a similar kind of thing with with AI. You read it, it's like, okay, this is obviously these guys have no idea what they're talking about. So
Oh, that's the thing. That these are the scammers, right? They see the opportunity and then they try to go for those who are less educated than them.
startup world is basically scammers, though, right? If you want to think about it one way, they don't think they're scammers because they think that they're doing the right thing by going out and like, oh, I'm going to do Chat GPT for insurance, but it's like they're kind of scammers because they're just going to take somebody else's money and waste it,
Yeah.
right? It's like, on the other hand, a fool and his money are soon parted, as they say as well, right? So hey, on the other side, you go like, oh, maybe they're teaching the VCs a lesson.
Yeah, but the problem that I've seen in the past is that sometimes they go after some people that they are investing in a startup for the very first time. It's someone that wants to become a VC, and then they they become a prey.
Yeah, actually, that by the way, that brings me up to the other side of the equation, right? Because we've talked about investment, and we haven't talked about investors.
Hmm.
I will say something else which I have noticed also, and this is definitely true, especially in maybe the last 10 years or so, is there are a lot of people who do investment that really shouldn't be investing, especially in the tech industry, right? And I've seen, guys who like to call themselves investors, and they say like, I'm going to write you a check for $2,500. Like $2,500, dude, that's not an investment, right? You used to
Yes.
work at Google. You got millions of dollars in the bank, guy. You used to work at Google. A $2,500 check isn't an investment. That's just like that's like a party ticket or something. So those guys, they don't pay any attention. They actually don't. If their commitment is $2,500, it's like okay, they're not committed to the company at all, right?
Yeah.
If you're actually committed to a company, you should be going like, okay, well, I'm going to put in at least 10 times that. And I want to talk to the
Yeah.
people to work on that company, right? I want to actually see what the company is going to do. But there are a lot of people who go, you know, some people are $2,500, some of the other people are $200,000. It depends on the person, but it's a similar kind of level of commitment where it's like they're not really thinking about what they're putting their money into. And it's like, okay, those guys are hobbyists. They like to just have like angel investor or VC in their LinkedIn. It's like, okay, well, that's also
Hmm.
a waste of time, right? And again, I took down
And
my
that's
LinkedIn partly because I was kind of like I'm tired of. I actually think LinkedIn's a bit of a scam, so I took everything down because I'm kind of like tired of it. So
yeah. Well, for me, I still use it, but I get it. Like what you should be doing is blocking a lot of people quickly. That's what I've learned. You
Well,
start receiving this
I've talked
blah,
about this
blah.
in the past. It should actually be a much better matching tool, right? It actually should be providing high value and saying like, I need to find somebody exactly like this, and then But instead, it's like everybody games their profiles, everybody games the
Yeah,
keywords, and then it's just like it's a waste of time at that point. So.
yeah. Well, there are many solutions that try to solve this problem, but nothing stays forever, right?
But also, actually, I think you've discovered this also, right? Again, people shouldn't be so hell bent on raising money from VCs or angel investors and stuff like that, because guess what? You learned it, right? It's like, guess what? There's people who want to pass on the torch, and they are more than happy to do self-financing, right? They will
Yeah,
finance you to take over their business if they believe in you. And if you can do that, that's almost the best way to go,
yeah,
right? Pick up a
yeah,
If you could pick up I mean, you landed into it, right? You pick up a business with an existing cash flow, and the guy says like, "Hey, owner financing." It's like, what better way to go into businesses there than that?
and 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 the thing is, people are not educated in that. That's why I like Cody Sanchez, because she was the one that I found out about these kind of things through her, and then I started digging in, and then there's like,
Scammer too, though, right? Because I mean, she's selling courses and stuff like that. At the end of the day, too, she's selling YouTube videos and courses too. But
yeah,
but she's
well,
but what she says, I agree with. By the way, at the end of the day, it's like, well, guess what? You should at least consider the alternative. So yes, I agree with it. I agree with
yeah,
that.
yeah. And to be honest, for me, it was just like what I like about YouTube sometimes, or even LinkedIn. It's like someone gives an idea, and if you are already kind of proficient in finding your ways to learn things, you don't need to go and pay for the course. Right.
Well, that's true. But Cody Sanchez sells the courses.
Well, I've heard from all of them, right?
Right?
Yeah. But
So
the thing
you
is that
can actually
sometimes
we
for
shouldn't
some
enter.
people it's
By the way, when you edit this, you should take out Cody Sanchez. You should blank this out just by because it's probably unfair. Because actually, I think her YouTube videos are actually pretty good, right? Because she actually does encourage people to just go out and think about this stuff. It's
yeah.
something where to your point, if you don't know about like owner financing, or you don't know about small business loans, you don't know that the SBA is going to give away all kinds of money to people. If you don't know about these things, then especially as a tech person, you're going to chase VC and angel investment. That's
Yeah.
actually almost the worst money you can get.
Yeah. I'll be honest, after our conversation, even with my my app, I created an LLC, and then I went like, okay, get a VC, and I'm like, wait a minute, we already have the app, we already have users. All I need is like, I don't know, $1,000, $2,000, maybe to invest a bit, do a bit of marketing. I'm like, you know what? Gotta keep it. gotta figure out a way
No,
to.
so in that case, right, if you already have an app and stuff, then you apply for if you're in the United States, you apply for an SBA government loan, right?
You
So you can
see?
apply for a loan from the SBA, which is actually pretty cheap money in the big scheme of things. And guess what? It's like, hey, if your business fails, you don't have to pay the loan back. It's like,
Can I do that from the outside?
I don't know. In Canada, you might have to do something else, but I would almost guarantee that somewhere in Canada they have something similar, right? Where you can just say, I'm a small business, I'm trying to get things going, and you can probably find some government sponsorship somewhere pretty easily. Because if you, and especially if it's only like, $10,000, $50,000, it's pretty easy to find those kind of things through a government program.
And it's nothing, to be honest. If you think about like 15K, right? And this is pouring just in kind of like marketing, because the app is already in there. We pay developers in Brazil. It's pretty cheap. You make
Well, that's it. There was
it's
actually, I forget who it was. I remember watching one guy, he had a video, and this guy, he makes something like, $50,000 a month or something like that. But that's basically what he does is he comes up with an app idea. And even if somebody else has already got the app idea, he goes on to Enrad or whatever. He buys the app. Hires some folks overseas to develop a particular branded version for him. He puts it onto, the App Store and then does some advertising. $30,000, and then he's starting to make a profit on every app, right? He's got like 15 apps or something like that. So,
Yeah.
so that's the thing, you can always find a way. And I think, in some ways, like chasing the VC thing, it's a bit, again, like the whole VC dream and the angel investing dream. Like you and I both been involved in companies where people went out and raised way too much money for an idea, which ultimately wasn't that great, right?
Mm-hmm.
And especially because they didn't have the ability to execute against the big vision. And the VC, it really should be like, okay, I got this big plan. I have this big idea that really does need a lot of money to hire the developers, to hire the marketing, to do the business development and everything like that. If you've already got an app, if you've already got something of a business, you can find other ways to raise money to scale it. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And again,
This
you'd be
is a
better off finding
lesson.
you find a couple of angel investors, maybe, guys who will talk to you on the weekend, or whatever, and just to say, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I'll put a little bit of money in your company. I'll work with you to make the business successful, right? You find somebody like that, it's a hell of a lot better than VCs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But this is why I wanted to talk about that, because it's a lot of romance kind of tales when it comes to the startup world. So you go to Netflix now, you can watch something about, oh, this is how that startup started, or that startup started, right? Like it's Uber, how Uber started, or how Spotify started. You can watch it, it's amazing. Hey, but then there aren't many Ubers or Spotify's out there, right? Most of the ones they just fail because of that. People are they chase the romance, the nice story, but the really hard ones they're not necessarily told.
No, and people are not willing to put in the work, if they're just chasing the romance. That's the sad part, right? And for every one of those companies, where they say like, hey, these companies are successful because of the VCs, if you actually look behind most of those companies, there was probably a lot of luck, being in the right place at the right time. And then there probably
Mhm.
were a couple of people that were just absolutely killing it, doing 100 hours a week, 120 hours a week or more, just like
Yeah,
really grinding really hard to make things happen. So most of it isn't as much of a fairy tale as people believe. And if you look at like even a lot of the really big technology companies like Microsoft and Google and things like that, most of those companies, they actually started with really good ideas and people who worked really hard to make those ideas happen, right? So it wasn't the VC dream of like, oh, we're going to bring in hundreds of millions of dollars in VC and then pay some AI dream. Those companies, they spent years building out technology, building out a moat in terms of the business and stuff like that. So there's a hell of a lot more to it than just that. VC, the startup world is not sexy at all. It's really not. You know that.
yeah,
I know that. I've been doing
yeah,
startups for all of my life, and it's definitely not a sexy world. And more companies fail than succeed by far. That is absolutely true.
yeah. But people they don't want to listen to that thing. That's my impression. Whenever I talk to someone that has an idea, they just do not want to listen to that part. They just want the sexy part, the Netflix. It's Netflix and I don't know Disney Plus are selling, right?
Doesn't last, and it's like it's a very, very, very difficult. I think I could very few books on this, like Crossing the Chasm and things like that. Like you read those kind of books, they tell you it's like even once you've got a few customers, right? It's really hard to go from 10 customers to 100 customers.
I know.
And then it's really hard to go from 100 customers to 1,000 customers, right? It's like, it's really hard. And people don't realize it. It's like just even getting to 10 is really hard work. And then once and they're scaling, it's just very, very hard work. And we haven't even talked about all the organizational issues, right? If you're trying to build a company and you go from like, hey, we got 5 guys in a room, and next thing you know, you got 70 people in the company. It's like, oh man, trying to manage that process, that's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
Most companies don't survive, right? That's the truth. Most companies don't survive that kind of growth. They fail in the middle of it.
Yeah. Even when you pass from like less than 10 to 25, it already chaos is established in there in terms of operations. Like, because when you are a smaller team, it's so much easier, especially if you are in the office, you talk to someone, everyone knows everything. But when you start hiring other people in there, and then suddenly if you are like a C-level, I would say, you start getting more distance because you're thinking about bigger things. Depending on the hire in there, in the middle, things start to happen really fast, and then like that bad hire start hiring other bad hires, and then suddenly you have cancer within the company. And when you realize that, it may be even too late.
It's really difficult to manage that growth process. Very few people can manage it. And, usually a lot of it, at least in my experience, boils down to having very clear of command roles, responsibilities, and things like that. It's like you have to design the processes to support the scalability. But even then, it's very difficult because, like you said, if you make one wrong hire, it can almost kill the company, right? In the early days, it's a very, very difficult thing. And I do things like, for example, in startups that I've done historically, I've always had an overseas team. Why do I have an overseas team, right? It's like, well, 2 reasons. One is because it's kind of nice to have labor where you can scale it up or down. That's always a nice thing. But the other thing, which is the more important thing, is it forces you to communicate in a way where you can communicate with people asynchronously, right? So you have to set up communication structures within your organization to deal with what is going to happen when you get to a bigger company where you do step back, right? And you have to start setting up the structures early for that. So having an offshore team forces you to deal with most of those problems very early on, right? Most people don't think about that sort of stuff. But even if you think about it, it's very difficult to do well and to succeed. If you don't think about it, it's almost a guaranteed failure, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true.
You know that as well, right? It's like, hey, you have the wrong hires, the wrong people on, and you go like paying that person a whole bunch of money to do what? And that's one problem. The other problem is if you have somebody who has a negative attitude, and they're like as you said before, they're like a cancer in the organization. They project negativity throughout the organization. They drag everybody down. There's some really good studies on that, where if you as an individual are sitting closer to high performers, you are more likely to perform at a higher level, right? So there's some really good studies around that. But the converse is also true, is that if you have one person who is negative in the organization, they're basically going to poison the rest of the well. And the impact of that is actually much higher than the positive impact of having A players, right?
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of stuff like that that's the reality of the startups, right? It's like all of those things you never think about, right?
Yeah.
Health insurance costs. Who ever thinks about health insurance costs when you're doing a startup? Right? You're in Canada, so you're okay. But in the United States, who thinks about that, right? It's like, hey, listen, me and my buddies were 40 years old. Guess what? It's like, if you're 35 years old and you're 50 years old, the health insurance costs are very different for the organization, right? You have to budget.
And maybe
everyone else is like 20, 25 years old, and you have one person who's 40, and it's like, boink, suddenly your health insurance rates go through the roof. Who thinks about that?
Yeah. And even when you're talking about like engineers, what usually people want, they want senior engineers so they can build things more complex and faster. right? And this has an impact in the salary and usually the age as well. Well, nowadays we have some engineers that are 25 and they are already kind of almost calling themselves architects because they did a boot camp. But
Yeah. I will say that's the other problem that I have as well, is that nowadays it's actually too easy to become a developer in some ways. So I will say, and maybe this sounds a little bit bad, but I would say a lot of the developers that I know actually don't understand deeply what they're doing. There's a lot of people who are really good about building apps, and they're really good about building a web app or something like that. But if you ask them, like, oh, hey, can you tell me how PHP works? Right? PHP developers say, hey, can you tell me how PHP works? They have no idea. They've never actually looked at the source code for PHP and see how it actually works internally.
Mhm.
Sometimes that doesn't have a problem, but 9 times out of 10, at some point in the company's path forward, you end up hitting a brick wall because somebody didn't think about the right thing. Like Twitter, Twitter is actually a great example of that. I don't know if you track Twitter's history, but like I think it was 3 times, like they couldn't scale, and they were like, "Oh, we're going to rebuild the system. Now it's going to be totally scalable." Then it totally failed again. It's like, oh, now we're going to rebuild it. It's like 3 times. It's because people didn't understand what they were doing. Right? Again, it's the young guys who was like, I'm an architect, but they actually didn't know. In Boston, there's a company also, same thing, right? I think they raised like $100 million. This is, I shouldn't mention them by name, but typical VC company. They had bottle of schnapps sitting on the desk and everything like that. They chose Scala as their cool language to go out and
Oh,
build all their cool systems in, and they're like all the normal stuff that you have associated with one of those typical VC, and it's like very clever people who didn't know what they were doing.
yeah. But this is a problem that I've seen happening many times in startups where they have the funding, they have the money, and then the engineers decide, let's use that cool tech that we want to kind of learn. And that's it. That's the decision for the architecture. It's like, what?
They choose some cool technology, but they don't understand how the technology works, right? So
Exactly.
they just don't even use it properly. Exactly. Hey, I'm going to do everything in Rust or Go. It's like, guess what? 50% of the internet runs on PHP still. Do you understand like n-tier architectures, all that other stuff? Like there's a whole bunch of other things that come in there, but beside the technology choice, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the things. I think that just comes with age, though. It's like you got to be exposed to that early. Um, I was very lucky early on in my career. I had the opportunity very early in my career to work with some people who were actually really world class engineers, and people who actually were a lot older than me who had a lot of experience as well, right? So I was very lucky to work with people like that. So I learned so much early on, but most
But
people don't have
yeah,
that
I think,
advantage.
yeah. And I think even you working with the standards, right? Like I remember when I started going to W3C to kind of read things, I was working in an agency, right? Weirdly enough, this one that I'm back to it. And just imagine it's like it was me going in there to figure some things out, right? And that's when if I should have gone deeper, right? Because I would have met people like you earlier in my life. But
Well, that
I
was the
think that
advantage
that
that I
was
had is that the people
yeah,
that I was working with were people that had actually established some standards before me, right? So actually, the company that I first started working with a long time ago in the technology space outside of NEC, a lot of the people working in that company had already done standards. Like they understood the value of deep technology, they understood the value of deep computer science. So, and they understood the value of really high quality engineering. And I was lucky to get thrown into that world. But on the other side of it, I had to put in some work there too. It's like you can't just go and work for a place like that and survive because, you know, If you're not willing to put in the work, you're not willing to put in the thought, then you're not going to survive. That's for sure, right? You get chewed up and spat out. So,
Yeah.
so I did do some work on that, but I was very, very, very lucky to be in that position. Especially I was in my 20s, right? I was very lucky.
Gavin, I think we could be here speaking for hours.
I think we already have been. It's about 2, right?
Yes.
So,
yes. All right. So I wanted to thank you so much again. I know that you are in the middle of a trip and you found the time to spend with me. So on behalf of all my listeners, I'd like to thank you for sharing your knowledge. And I'm pretty sure I'm gonna have to invite you back so we can talk a bit more, maybe about standards.
yeah, more than happy to come back. So, yeah, hopefully I wasn't waffling too much because, as you said, I've been traveling all day. So, and I'm sleep
No,
deprived right now. But as you know, I'm usually sleep deprived. So,
all right. Thank you so much.
all
And
right.
I'll see you
Yep.
later.
Thanks,
All right.
Tracy.
Take
Yep.
care.
Cheers.